Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, The Hidden Workforce Risks in 2026. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our fabulous panel. My name is Andrew Busby. I'm your host for today. I've spent what feels like a lifetime in retail, over 30 years, a former retailer. Now have my own business, and I advise tech companies who are working in the retail space. Written for Forbes and now writing as a retail contributor to Fortune. And I also enjoy doing things like this and keynote speaking at conferences around the world. So that's enough about me. We're really going to be focusing on, as I say, the hidden workforce risks in 2026 and what leaders can change now. And alongside our wonderful speakers, who, as I say, I'll introduce in just a second. Before I do that, quick bit of admin. This webinar is going to run for around about 60 minutes and will be available on demand. Please submit questions in the Q&A box. Really hope that you can do that. We will try to take those as we go through the session. Just some on 24 housekeeping specific to the platform we're using. Related content, you've got an interactive console. So there's related content, helpful links and downloadable slides will be on a PDF. Speaker bios, please connect with us on LinkedIn. We're all nice, friendly people. We don't bite. And we'll also launch a couple of polls. So please get involved in those. We'd love to get your thoughts on some of the discussion topics. And there's an audience chat facility. And at the end, a survey will pop up. We'd be really grateful if you can take the trouble to complete that. So in terms of what we're going to be discussing, a number of years ago, I worked in the workforce management space for a while. And I always felt that a lot of it was around kind of the way that leadership viewed the workforce. Is it a cost? Is it a risk? And we're going to get into that today. And I think for me, this is particularly relevant that we're doing this now because I think we all realize that physical retail is more important and more relevant than ever before. And this isn't theory. As I say, we've got a great panel and expect some no-nonsense, pragmatic insights. So there's going to be three kind of areas, which I'll just touch on briefly, that we're going to cover. The first is the cost of change versus cost of waiting. The second is insight arriving too late. And the third is adoption reality on the ground. So I really hope that by the end of this, you'll have some really, as I say, pragmatic, useful insights to take away. So let's get started by first introducing the panel. Ladies first, so I'll come to you first. Sarah, please introduce yourself.
So hi everyone, I'm Sarah Cowen. I'm a change control and activity planning manager within the home delivery division of Currys. So a slightly different facet of workforce planning in that we are actually travelling to people's homes to do installations, but have a background in across a plethora of retailers and have been fortunate enough to lead a few workforce management deployments and business as usual operations before joining Currys a couple of years ago.
Lovely. Thank you, Sarah. Heather, over to you.
Hi, so I'm Heather Weaver. I'm the workload manager at Our Co-op. If you haven't heard of Our Co-op, we are the largest independent co-op in the UK. We've recently formed from two former societies of Central Co-op and Mid Counties to create one huge new business. So I look after all of the workforce management, planning, labour forecasting, and I also do the internal comms and compliance for our food sites. We're quite a varied business as well, so we don't just have food stores. We have early years nurseries, travel branches, funeral sites as well have come back now, and we also have a utilities business. So lots of different areas that we kind of touch point with those trading groups, different types of people often work in those industries. And so we kind of have a variety of challenges and solutions that we come up with as well.
Thanks very much. Chris, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris McCullough. So I co-founded Rotageek about 15 years ago. I was the CEO, and then we were acquired by Elmo Group, an Australian HR company with a presence in the UK, and I now head up the sales team. And so I've been fortunate enough to work with some of the biggest names on the high street and help them sort of manage risk and workforce in a really dynamic, changing environment, and significant amounts of change externally and internally for our clients over the last 10 years or so. And prior to that, I was an A&E doctor. So again, there's sort of lots of parallels in how you manage risk with incomplete information. So might touch on some of those in the next hour or so.
Wow, we're going to get into A&E in workforce management. Okay, so thank you very much for that. Right, I mentioned that we're going to have a couple of polls, and the first one is coming right up. So, setting the risk landscape. You should be able to see the poll there. We're looking ahead to the rest of 2026. The question is, where do you see the greatest workforce risk emerging? Okay, so, A, insight arrives too late to influence decisions. B, operational reality doesn't match the plan. C, economic and cost volatility. Or D, engagement and adoption on the ground. Fingers on buzzers. Let's go with the first poll.
And when we were planning for this, the events of the weekend hadn't happened. So C was perhaps less prominent. Kind of highlights how the external world can change our approach very quickly.
Yeah, it definitely does, doesn't it? Even though we all can expect things sometimes, but it actually happening and what then the kind of follow-on impact of that is.
Yeah.
You never know until it's actually happened, do you?
It's kind of, isn't it? Planning for all eventualities, but then there's quite likely, I mean, nobody could have predicted COVID. Maybe this is slightly more predictable, I don't know, but the impact of it is going to be interesting.
It's definitely a reminder that there's only so much you can control, and that there is a level of just having to react to what happens, and you can't invest too much time and energy in planning that. You just have to almost build the space to be able to just react. Yeah,
I think that bit's really important, is to understand that the world will just change and swipe us from the side at various points, and holding some capacity to react to the unexpected is clearly important.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting the results. All right. Okay, so insight arrives too late to influence decisions. That is currently neck and neck with economic and cost volatility. But out in front at 36.8% of the votes, operational reality doesn't match the plan. Sarah, what are your thoughts on that? Does that ring true with you?
Yeah, you probably tell by the smile that that rings quite true. So I think, as the person in my role who has the job of controlling the plan, I think there's just always things that crop up, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, that actually building space to react, I think, makes you less nervous about actually everything not sticking to the plan. I think that's something that's come through experience of, you can burn an enormous amount of energy trying to perfect the plan. And actually, I think my reality now is, if the plan is 80% right and we're reacting to the 20%, that's probably a really healthy place to be, because the level of effort to match the plan to and to keep the plan accurate, I think is just not worth it. And I think the other piece that, and I'm fortunate, I'm just expanding my team to allow us to have the capacity to do this, is actually boots on the ground. So I think it's really easy, particularly in the workforce space, to sit behind your computer and crunch all the data and think that you have the accurate picture of what's happening. And so in my space, we're making a real commitment to get out at least once a week and go, is what we think happening actually happening? And just that view of understanding where the disconnect is, my hope is, my aspiration, my commitment to the business is, we'll get better at making the two match, because I think we'll understand what are the drivers of that difference. And I think it talks to some of these things actually that are the other risks, which is that we're working with outdated information? Is that something in the world that has changed? Or actually is the engagement and adoption of change initiatives, which is a big deal in my space, not landing quite as quickly as we expected? And therefore, what is that disconnect, and how can we in having awareness of that, get it back to the plan. So I think it's almost that trying not to be afraid of the fact that reality doesn't match the plan, because it in my experience, it never does. But it's that how do you then respond to that without the frustration of going, well, how did this happen? Because like, why didn't you put it on the plan? Which is like the obvious reaction, but like it's not helpful to the end user, I think.
Yeah. Heather, what's your thoughts on this?
I definitely agree about that. Like you said, we sit here in our computers sometimes and we'll crunch the numbers, like you said, and everything we do is in a best case scenario, isn't it? It's as if everything else will remain equal, nothing will change other than the things that we know about. And like we said, when we're waiting for the poll results to come through, you know, major things can happen over the weekend. They can affect different parts of our businesses. Like I said, we look after travel as well as food retail, and you don't know how that will impact it. But equally, there's other changes that happen which are much smaller. You know, a road closure outside of one of our food sites can have a humongous impact if we don't know it's coming. So like Sarah said about how you kind of give the tools that they can make a decision in the moment in the store and support them with that, and engaging with operational teams is something that I've always done a lot of when we've done all of our workforce systems, because like you said, you don't know, with the best, all of the data you could ever have, you will not know what is specifically happening in that store. It can even be that, you know, somebody can have something personal that's going on that can have a huge impact in a store, can't it? You know, those kind of things, and that emotional side of things, which, you know, data can give you a hint about, oh, this could be going on, but you actually need to still have that face-to-face and speak to the people who are there to find out the better picture of what's going on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm going to jump into our first of the three topics. Chris,
you've got paper over your camera there. There you go. Amazing.
There you go. That's a giveaway. Yeah. No, this is all up here. There are no notes. So yeah, Chris, jump in when I put my script over the camera again. So the cost of change versus the cost of waiting. We've just seen where risk feels most visible, but underneath that, what are you seeing about the risk of staying still? Heather, I'll come back to you. What cost of change versus the cost of waiting?
I suppose the thing is, every kind of hour that you have in store, or even every minute now, is a lot more expensive than it was a few years ago, wasn't it? You know, with minimum wage rates going up, which I think we all agree they should do, to support our kind of colleagues. We have a lot of colleagues who are close to that point. And as a cooperative, you know, we make sure that we do things in the right way. So we always maintain differential as well. So yeah, like I said, that means that every minute someone is in store working, doing tasks, we need to feel that we're getting value for money from it, don't we? So that cost of waiting has increased, therefore having a mechanism to be able to, like we said before, about respond, react, but make the right decision at the right time as well. That's kind of the key thing for us. You know, saying suddenly we want to stop doing a task to save us some money might be completely the wrong one, and it can have kind of implications further down the line, and you don't always see that straight away, do you? But using the data that you have in front of you to make those decisions at that right point, and filling in any kind of lull time as well. You know, not all of our stores haven't got customers frantically coming in from, you know, 7 a.m. till 11 p.m. when we're open. So what do we do to kind of spread that labour across that time period? How can we bump it up so you smoothen it out so you've not got huge peaks and troughs of demand coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. And that must be one of the biggest challenges. Now, could you, Sarah, in your business in Currys, you must, this must be quite acute.
Yeah, so I think for us, and in the home delivery space, like we're a bit spoiled because we typically know our workload 24 hours in advance, which is very different to when I worked in that retail space, which even if you plan it on historic data, the weather might change, something might change. And so you're very much reacting. I think for us, this is about really keeping front and center what's the right thing for our customers and our colleagues. And so when does change change right and when is holding our ground right? And I think this is so it's both balancing that workload piece, but also knowing we're trying to make a huge amount of improvement because that's the world we live in, right? We want to improve service, we want to improve our colleague engagement, we want to, remove those frustrations that our colleagues have, but actually understanding as human beings, there's a finite capacity as well for all that level of change. And so there's what's the business case say versus what's the human side of that, and how do you balance that in this like waiting and world of constant change? Because I think the world has moved on. Change isn't something that happens once every 5 years in a business case cycle, or change is constant. And whether that is the macro changes that give us that slight more efficiency, or it's big change, i.e. we're replacing a whole system to improve something. It's understanding how does all of that come together and how are we balancing that with everything else. And sometimes I think that you've got to be able to say we're doing this change, and so that change has got to wait, even though on paper they're both right. And so I think what I'm trying to say is a decision you made a week ago might have been right a week ago, but you've got to constantly keep evaluating this and go, am I getting the benefit of the change versus has something changed? Is my adoption not where I thought? Do I need to slow down? Do I need to go faster? Has actually something external changed, and that was a lower priority become a higher priority? And I think it's that. I don't think it's actually an either or. I think it's a constant balancing game, and you have to keep. I often say, like, it's not mastermind. We don't have to just go, well, I've started, so I'll finish. We can actually change course. I'm a bit notorious for that phrase, but I think it's a useful reminder that we're dealing with human beings at the end of, and not just business cases and numbers and volumes. And, we all want to hit those things because they're important to the business, but really keeping that balance with the human impact at the end of it is, I think, a constant cycle of assessment in a way that it never was previously. It was almost, I think you could have set the path at the start of a financial year and that was pretty much your plan and you stuck to it, and as a project ran late, and the world just doesn't work like that anymore. It likes to throw you this need to constantly reassess.
Mm. And
I think what you said, Sarah, sorry, Andrew, about as humans, we only have so much capacity for change, don't we? We know that ourselves, if lots of things are changing on our workload, and like you said, you've got that business case and that's changed 20 times, we're only human too. We'll get frustrated by that, won't we? And understanding that, the people we're impacting with the changes we're trying to make, they have a limit as well. And like you said about prioritizing it, that's definitely something that kind of we do as well, around reassessing all the time. Is that still the top priority? Is this still the most important thing that's going to make the biggest difference right now to us? Because like you said, that can completely change all of the time. And sometimes it's unexpected at times, isn't it? People react to things not in the way that you think that they might, because we've all got different opinions, haven't we? It's the great thing about opinions. We've all got one.
Yeah. Chris, I just want to get your thoughts, and I think you alluded earlier to the fact that, as we sit here today discussing this, we're in the middle of geopolitical turmoil, which does have, it might be happening thousands of miles away, but it does have an impact on the landscape here in the UK.
Yeah, it totally does. And I guess there's some impact that is clearly visible and expected. So a change in fuel prices, for example, and the knock-on effect that has, and there'll be some unexpected changes. So we sort of work in this ever-changing macroeconomic environment with some known risks and then some uncertainty. I think there's lots of really interesting themes in the discussion. One is what we say no to is really important. We have this discussion in Rotageek a lot. It's really important that we say no, be clear on what we're not going to do, which creates the space for what we are going to do. And then to Sarah's point, I think this is the world in which we live. And there's an A&E analogy coming up, which is when a patient comes into A&E, you make the right decision when that patient lands about how I'm going to treat you right now. There's lots of things that I don't know, but I'm going to make the right decision right now. But I know that I'm going to get more information, and then I'm going to refine my approach. And I think it feels like the business world is moving much more towards that approach of, this is the right decision with everything we know right now. I also know that I don't know these things. I'm going to go and find out, and I might refine my approach, and that's okay, I think. And it's not being uncertain or unclear. It's being absolutely clear that given what I know, this is the right approach, but I will modify it. And it feels like that's a stronger position than what we might have been able to do years ago, which is, as Sarah said, like, this is how the next year is going to run. We just don't have that luxury because of the speed at which the world moves. And I think the third thing is that decision of when to jump. So AI is a great example. There's lots of people adopting AI very early, but there is risk in moving early, investing a lot in AI and not seeing results. And I think the business world is watching, and people will jump at different points dependent on sort of individual risk assessments and also the organizational risk appetite. And some organizations want to jump in and be ahead of the game, and others are more judicious and think, I'm just going to wait until I know that there is a real clear value. So I think all of these things play into that there's a cost of change and a cost of waiting, but there is also this sort of individual perception of that cost and risk, and the organizational risk tolerance, and all of those things play into when we might jump into making a decision or sort of step into that decision. And when we do, that decision needs to, as Sarah said, like 80%, here is the plan. There will always be things that we haven't identified, surprises down the line. And what you want is to work in an organization and with external partners who understand that world will change and the plan will change, and we will just navigate through it.
Yeah. So I guess it comes down to the fact that change might feel scary and risky, but staying the same doesn't necessarily remove it, and I guess it's more challenging than ever before. I want to move on to our second poll, and that's all around insights arriving too late. So the poll will come up in a second. The question that, as if by magic, there it is. So the question is, when workforce-related issues surface in your organization, they most often become visible when? Okay, so when? During peak trading or high pressure periods? I guess people would say, well, we're constantly in high pressure periods these days. Or B, after payroll or month-end reporting. C, when finance or the board asks questions. And D, we usually spot issues early and correct mid-cycle. So same as poll one, fingers on buzzers if you can get your answers in, and then we'll take a look at the results and just have a brief discussion on that. So A, during peak trading or high pressure periods. B, after payroll or month-end reporting. C, when finance or the board asks questions. Or D, we usually spot issues early and correct mid-cycle.
There's well, while that's been answered, there's a question come in from Kevin Turnbull saying, on the topic of assessing priorities and focus, the downside is that if it's not done well, you can start change but not finish it, and that sort of change fatigue and the frustration of shifting priorities. And I speak to the team in Rotageek about this a lot. I think, like, I see my job and the leader's job, essentially leaders are exposed to this level of change and this level of shifting priorities, and our job is to kind of smooth that out for the team and say and sort of assess the shifting priorities, and if there is a need to shift focus or to refine the approach, to explain to the team, here's what we knew and here's why we made that decision, here's what's changed, and here's the change in focus. And so there's a level of like modulation, so that you don't just transmit this entire noise to the team, because I think that's when it doesn't work. But I don't know what you think, Sarah.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think it is. So we have in my space, and it's something we introduced last year, we have quite a robust prioritization scoring criteria, which is designed to stop the noisiest person having the most influence. And it really is designed to say, this has been evenly considered and all the right people have had a input, and this is the number we got to. So when we're asked to reprioritize, we're quite scientific about it. In fact, we go, is the prioritization score changed based on, to your point, Chris, have we got new information that means the decision we made now looks different? But I think it's also being mindful of how far along in that change you are, how many people you've touched, and what's the history that's gone before. Because I think we have to make tough decisions as leaders, and I think it is about being honest when you're making those decisions and telling the story of why. But I think you also have to be mindful of how many times you've done that, because I think it's okay to do that every once in a while. But if you're literally getting to pre-launch and then going, oh, hey, we changed our mind, here's another thing, and you do that repeatedly, people lose trust, and trust is really, really important in this context of change. And I think it's even more important, that transparency. I think colleagues demand that more. So I think they're telling the why and not just going, this decision was made by the board and you don't need to know why, but actually being able to explain it and make it relevant to colleagues is even more important. So I think it's that knowing what, it is kind of what we were talking about earlier, knowing why you made the decision and why you might need to change it, but being really comfortable telling that story to everyone impacted as well, and giving them space to be frustrated by that, because it's okay. That's a natural human response and you should expect that. I think that's the bit we sometimes forget. We go, oh, we made this decision. We've had a couple of weeks to get our heads around it. And then when we're telling the story, we expect everyone to jump on board within 10 minutes. But actually, we didn't do that as leaders. So allow people the space to get on board with it.
And Heather, it
I
must
like the
be
prioritisation score.
Yeah, and all your different businesses in the co-op, that must have an impact on this, because I imagine that they're all sort of operating slightly different ways. They have different demands, different levers to pull.
Yeah, totally differently. And even as much as like I said, the personalities that typically are in those industries are very, very different. A food retail manager is a very different personality to a nursery site manager. But I think with the thing about the prioritisation and everything else, and like I said, I love the idea of having a score, because I love things to be more less kind of driven by whatever your kind of opinions are and stuff, and doing it that way. And like you said, we all have that person. I'm sure everybody on here had someone come to mind as soon as Sarah said about the loudest person who such and such body said this, so we're all now doing that. But I think for me it's also being clear on the objective, isn't it, at the end? So how you get there might change, but what is it, the outcome that we want to achieve and the change that we want to see?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we have the results of the poll, and there we are. So just to run down them again: during peak trading or high pressure periods, after payroll or month-end reporting, when financial report asks questions, or we usually spot issues early and correct them. And the runaway winner of this one, perhaps not surprising, perhaps at just over 53% of the votes during peak trading or high pressure periods. So I will throw it open for a brief comment on those results. Who wants to go first with that?
Let me jump in. I think it's really interesting. I think that what we're seeing is we know that it's at those times of high stress and pressure that we see where the system doesn't quite work. And I think in all of these situations, it's sort of incumbent on us as leaders to sort of identify the problem, think, how are we going to fix it? Number one, focus on that. And I think, Sarah, you mentioned this, is, how did we get here doesn't matter in the moment. It's like, let's fix this thing. Everyone just focus. And then the next bit is to say, and how do we minimize the chance of that happening again? And that sort of feeds into the do we have the systems that allow us to know in advance what this challenge might be, and then the systems to affect change rapidly, because that helps us at the point that you're in a high pressure period. You've missed the proactive window to intervene, but how do you solve that problem quickly? So trying to maintain that sort of learning culture in that environment is hard. And just touching on the people who shout the loudest, often it's the people that are quiet that are the ones that you need to listen to. There's a sort of medical analogy of when we talk about out of hospital sort of medical situations, don't go to the people that are vocal because they've got an airway and they're fine. Go to people that are quiet. And it's almost the same in businesses. The people that are vocal have sort of some insight into the situation. The people that are quiet probably have quite a lot of insight, and you're not hearing that, to sort of proactively go to those. So I think it's a really interesting result. I didn't quite expect that.
Yeah, Heather, Sarah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting. Oh, sorry, Sarah, do you want to go?
No, go on.
It's interesting what Chris was saying about it's almost like perception versus reality, isn't it, often? And I mean, peak trading for most retailers would be Christmas, wouldn't it? That is the one that everybody talks about, everybody focuses on. You know, we talk about it loads, but in reality, our actual peak trade as a convenience retailer is summer. When it's a gorgeous, hot, sunny day, that is a peak for us. And so it's how do you remove people's perception of, oh, this is such a high, intense time at Christmas. Actually, it's kind of not, but the other part, and you need to focus, and it's making sure that you're focusing in the right places, isn't it? So that, you know, those workforce issues surfacing, it's like, what is the problem and what is the solution, isn't it? Always with it. So yeah.
So
absolutely.
I agree, because I think peak is seen as this, it happens once, and I think actually it's much more nuanced than that. So we're quite category led, and different categories peak at different times. You buy a laptop at a different time of the year to when you buy a cooker, and all of those things, and they require different skills. And I think the other piece is sometimes it's good to just pause and reflect on workforce issues can be a result of something positive happening, like trade is better than you were expecting. That's a good problem to have, right? And sometimes we don't just pause and go, this happened, it doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong, and almost pause and not get into the finger pointing and just go, right, how do we react? And how can we? We definitely need to learn from all of those. I'm a big fan of that, separating the reaction from the review, so that you go, what can I do right now? And I think sometimes it's about being honest and saying, actually, right now, I can't do anything. Like in my space, we have some highly skilled jobs, and if we need resource that does that, we can't flick a switch and get gas engineers, right? They take 2 years to train. There's not a big surplus in the workforce that we can go and recruit them. And so sometimes I have to frustrate the business and say that lead time is going to go out. I know we want to be able to offer customer next day delivery, but it's going to look like 3 days, and that is the reality. And that, let's be honest about that, and let's communicate that well, and then we can quiet the noise, if you like, and then move on to the right, how do we ensure we don't end up in this again? What is our strategic plan to grow that skill or have greater depth or greater flexibility, or what does that look like? And so I think it's sometimes pausing and going, workforce issues aren't necessarily a sign that someone did something wrong. They can be a result of something super positive, like trade being better. They can be very weather driven. I think, like, if all workforce managers could predict the weather, they'd be very happy people, because it would make the scheduling so much easier if we could, know that reality. But I think it's understanding what the pressure's telling you and what's the appropriate immediate action and the strategic action, and separating those two, for me anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, the point you made about the weather, because this is something that fascinates me. That the weather is blamed or it's attributed to lack of sales or poor sales, or the reverse. But then I saw the ONS figures for sales in January, and we know this January was, I think I'm right in saying it was the wettest on record, or something like that. But the sales, the numbers were positive; they were up. So I don't know what that means, and whether, I mean, there is a correlation. We know that, last autumn it didn't get cold early enough, did it? So sales of coats weren't as high as they otherwise would have been. But it's another variable, isn't it, that goes into, I guess, a mix of so many different variables we have to try to manage.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that this about insights arriving too late. That the world is such that the technology landscape is moving so fast. We can do things this week that we couldn't do last week. It's incredible, and I like it, and hugely exciting. But we've all got to think about going back to the challenge. What once you've solved that challenge, what can we do to minimize the risk of that happening again? And often there is data and insights that we can surface in advance to make planning for, I guess, the insight into the risk of something happening. And so it then becomes a probability risk balance, and things like weather. We've got lots of clients who have weather dependent businesses, and the reality is you're then dependent on the forecast accuracy, which clearly gets more accurate the closer you get to the day. And then the question is, and how are you going to react to that? So if you have we have clients that can't, and with the Employment Rights Act, this is going to become more challenging if we think it's going to roll out as it might. The ability to make changes to shifts and schedules and plans becomes much more constrained. Therefore, you can have the insight that there's a big weather front coming in tomorrow, and it's going to massively affect footfall or traffic, either positively or negatively. It's really then important to consider, so how can or might I be able to react to that? And so there's the ability to have insight, but then also the ability to operationally react. And you need both of those things to sort of effectively navigate uncertainty, I think.
Yeah, and I'd probably add a piece, and I think it was something that was said earlier around, what's your master objective? What's your North Star you're trying to get to? Because not all insight can be a distraction as well as an enabler. And I think so that what's your reality? What can you do about it? And how is that getting you closer to your end objective? Is a really important piece to keep anchored to. And again, I think it's, are you getting closer, and are you doing something that's actually moving you further away? Because sometimes you can get distracted and go, oh, I've got this piece of insight and I feel like I need to react to it, but actually in the context of your broader objective, that's not going to help you get there. And I think that it's great having all of this insight, but you can almost get into analysis paralysis, or you can try and react to everything. And I think tying it back to what are my key objectives, and how does this help me get there? And actually, sometimes it feels like insight arrives too late. And what we mean by that is I couldn't correct it right then, but there's still things you can learn from that might help you more strategically. And I think it does come back to that. Sometimes there'll be immediate action you can take, but sometimes it's just a strategic learning that says, I need to remember this for next September, and almost diarise it in August to go back to that insight in a year's time, because actually it arrived too late for this year, but that insight is still powerful to help me next year. And so I think in the world of AI, we almost want instant information, and it helps us have that. But actually, where you can't, 2 years ago, you wouldn't have had that. You would almost have, built your whole plan for the year at the start of the year. You might have tweaked it quarterly, and the world has changed, but actually not all insight needs to drive an immediate response.
That's interesting. And that is kind of like a really nice segue into the third area that I want to discuss with you, and that's adoption reality on the ground. I guess it's kind of, where do workarounds start creeping in? And what does that tell us about the gap between how work is designed centrally and how it actually flexes on the ground? And for me, be interested in your thoughts and whether you agree or not. For me, this goes kind of almost to the heart of the, what we call the traditional retail command and control model. Now, that may not, you might argue that may not exist today. It certainly did in the past, but be interested in your thoughts. Heather, what are your thoughts on that?
So obviously the adoption on the ground, I suppose it would link back to some of the solutions from the previous one, really, around kind of operational stakeholders and making sure that you kind of engage in them all the time, because they'll shout up if there's a problem, if you've got that relationship there in the first place, won't they? Like Sarah said, you can have too much data at times, and people by their operational experience will be able to tell you quicker and easier what is actually happening. In our one of the kind of problems we're looking at the minute in our early years is how can we support them with the recruitment issues that they have, which is obviously not within the Rotageek system, but we can see what they're doing in there and their working practices, and therefore that will be having a knock-on to it as well. So using that kind of signal bit that we've got and the reporting on it and everything, I think that, and the stakeholders really all the time, that I feel like that's all I ever do is speak to people. If ever I'm working from home and my husband's around, he takes the mick that I'm always just chatting. But I do think it has a purpose, doesn't it? That's the way that you find out what's going on and everything else. Yeah.
I'd completely agree with that. And I think you said it earlier, it's we plan for best case. And sometimes the operational reality isn't that. Recruitment challenges means you haven't got a perfect skill mix, or in the joys of our space, we can have the people and not the vehicles, because we have two types of resource that are pretty critical to delivering to customers. And I think understanding the delta between that best case that you planned and the actual reality, and and I think it's so important to connect with such a broad range of stakeholders so that you can go, what's a local issue, of which you probably have other structures that are there to support solving that, versus what are the common themes that probably need tackling more centrally. Is that have you got a skills gap, and how can you tackle that? Or have you got have you lost a particular type of colleague that is now giving you certain times of year when students tend to drop out? It can give you a real I've suddenly got an evening problem that I don't have the rest of the year. And I think keeping close to that, the reality on the ground and the adoption, and I think also just having an acceptance of it very rarely goes how you planned it to go. And that's not to say that planning is a wasted effort, because it gives you a benchmark to measure against. It is that keeping space for reacting to the reality.
I think the skill mix and the visibility of that, Sarah, is really important. And that's where the auto scheduling part of things really, really helps, doesn't it? Because you can see, okay, what tasks am I struggling to fill all of the time? What is the problem? Is it a training issue in the store? Is it reluctance by certain colleagues to pick up that task? And like we said before, those costs we've all got are going up and up, aren't they? So that expectation on having a colleague who can do a bit of everything and fill that gap, really, really helpful.
Yeah, we've had some brilliant insight recently around, we've invested really heavily in upskill training, and then we don't schedule people quickly enough, and so they lose their confidence and the lack of practice. And so we've had to change our scheduling practice to rotate people through skills that they've got to maintain that skill. Because we've come out of peak and gone, we want to make sure everyone's got these skills. And then everyone goes, yeah, but you trained me 2 months ago. I'm not sure I will feel comfortable doing it now because I haven't done it in 2 months. And so that how do you keep skills alive is a really interesting piece where the theory and the reality look quite different sometimes.
Yeah, and also, like you said, if you've got that gap, you've got it for a reason, and the confidence bit is a huge part, isn't it? Like you said, making sure that you've got that quick transition between, I've now acquired that knowledge and skill, I need to put it into practice, and then building on it, that they're being supported, and how you use the tools that we've got to hand to be able to do that. I think, our one for us is post office. Lots of colleagues are very nervous about the post office. We have them where they're combined on kind of a kiosk till, and because it's quite complex and there's sometimes you can hand over lots of cash and things, so they worry that they're going to make a mistake, but actually you've got to ensure the training is right and then put it into practice in that moment once they've got it, and shadowing and all those kind of on the ground things that make a difference as well, don't they?
I think that touches on a really important thing in the context of change and uncertainty, is having an organisation that there's psychological safety to make mistakes, because you need to be able to say, here's what I did, I thought it was the right thing, turns out it wasn't, let's correct it, and what would I have done differently? And that conversation happens if people feel psychologically safe.
I think that's a changing beast as well, isn't it, at the moment? Retail, when I first started, and other people are on this call as well, I'm sure you can remember a time where it was like, you just did it because you were told to do it, and that's it. There was no question of it. But that, luckily, is not the world we're in now, is it? It is much more kind of safe to make a mistake.
Yeah, and I think it is also a changing world about the empowerment sits in different places to make decisions. Yeah. Because I think, the reality is those people on the ground in the moment are best placed to make the decisions.
Yep.
And I think that retail has evolved, and actually I think workforce in general, but particularly in retail, the empowerment of where decisions get made and that trusting people to do things with the right intent is much more both a colleague and a customer expectation. And I think there's been quite a lot actually out there at the moment where actually customers are just less forgiving of constraint. Is that customers understand you will get it wrong sometimes, but they're no longer prepared to accept a computer said no as the reason for getting it wrong. They want a human touch.
Yeah, I think there's a really important thing there as well about the data, because we've got access to a lot more data, and in fact, within the Rotageek platform, there's the ability to surface data throughout the organization. And if you do that, you need to empower people to make decisions off the back of that data, but also to understand that data might be wrong. It's the local knowledge of when you think about forecasts are great, but we also know that forecasts are 100% inaccurate. You don't get a 100% accurate forecast. So your teams have that inherent knowledge, and what you want is that interplay between the data and that interpretation of the data in order to make the most effective decisions. There's a really lovely Formula One analogy, I think, which is the Formula One engineer. Their job is to decide, are you coming in this lap or not? And they've got access to hundreds and thousands of data points. And that's your point here about the analysis paralysis, but they don't care. The only decision they have to make is yes or no this lap. That's it. And I think we can get distracted by all of the data, but focusing on what's the decision that I have to make and what's the relevant data is really key.
I was similar to that. It's all about knowing what is out there, isn't it? We've got some really weird and wonderful stores, and the characteristics of them can vary massively. We've got some in the Cotswolds where you've got restrictions, you've got a step, all these little nuanced things that seem irrelevant, but actually they really make a difference, and making sure that you've got the awareness of the good and the bad as well. So some of our operational managers, they'll be the first one to tell me if something is missing. If they've not got the time, been given in their budget for like a new coffee machine or whatever it is that they've got in their store. The other way around, if something disappears, are they as forthcoming with that information? Not all the time, but making sure that I have that understanding of what the reality is and how they're using it, and start to see in the data that we've got what is actually going on. Is there a squeeze? Is there a bit of, space for us to move into? And stuff, I think makes a difference as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we are just about 10 minutes from wrapping things up. So what I wanted to do in this time, and by the way, for people who are watching, please get your questions in if you have any. But to kind of pull this all together, I wanted to ask each of you what leaders can do now. So if you had kind of one thought, one piece of advice, one insight, what is one shift leaders can make now to reduce exposure in 2026? Sarah, do you want to kick off?
Oh, it's a great question. So I think I'd probably say get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's probably always been true, but I think it's more true now than ever. There's so much. The world's, the year's going to end differently to how we start, and we won't necessarily know what that looks like. And so I think it is that, I say get comfortable being uncomfortable, but almost set your level of uncomfort you're prepared to tolerate, because I think that shapes both your organizational tolerance and your personal tolerance, and everyone knowing that is a really good framework to lead from.
Get comfortable being uncomfortable. I like it. Heather.
Mine would probably stick with the people theme and about engaging with your stakeholders. There are lots of them. It isn't just the people who we manage within the workforce system who are our stakeholders. Whatever the commercial team might be doing, being more aware and engaged with them can benefit you. People teams as well, legislative change, like Chris mentioned, there's lots of it coming, making sure that we're up and understanding what are all these different stakeholders' challenges going to be, and therefore how can we benefit each other in advance. So having those relationships and understanding what, not just being focused on this is my problem and I've got to solve this one thing. Actually, most of the time it's a shared problem, isn't it, when we actually reach out and speak to other people. We're just all coming at it from a different angle at times.
Chris.
I think those to answer a really interesting one is about the organizational sort of risk tolerance, and then it's sort of empowering your people in advance to understand that the world will change and sort of get them comfortable with it. And then I think I would say having the systems in place to surface sort of intelligence and insight about what the challenges might be in advance, and the world sort of increasingly allows us to do that, and then making sure technologically you've got the ability to react, because a lot of the levers that we would pull to react to change are workforce levers. So actually knowing it, having some insight in advance, and then being able to react quickly is really key. And then in the context of the organizational awareness of risk tolerance and your people bought into the fact that things will change, all three of those allow you to sort of compete effectively in what is a tough and dynamic environment.
No, absolutely. Well, we've left a bit of time for questions, and we've got a couple that have come in. But just before we get to that, some things that I noted down from the conversation that we've had, which I thought were really interesting comments that you all made. One was we discussed the definition of peak, and it's not necessarily what we might have thought. It's not just Christmas. I think that was Heather. You were talking about the summer. Another one. Separate reaction from review, which I liked. And Sarah, you was talking about insight can be a distraction as well as an enabler, which I loved. So yeah, I said a couple of questions. So with first one, Heather, if you want to take this first of all, what would you pressure test in your current system tomorrow?
Well, I can tell you what I was discussing with my team yesterday about the one thing that I'm desperate to get onto. I would love to move our early years sites onto auto-scheduling. So I think that would be a pressure test in itself, a wholly new industry. We've not done that kind of thing before. We've only ever managed the time and attendance. I think that would be a really key one for me. One of the kind of metrics that I don't think we pay attention to enough is around when someone's leaving, why are they leaving? And that is, part of our business that really does. That's a huge cost, isn't it? When someone leaves, we have to replace them at the moment. And so making sure that we're being aware of that and putting things in place that will stop people doing that, because everyone wants certainty. They want to know what, they're going to be working, don't they? And as an industry, it's one that's quite different, and it'd be nice to kind of adapt our skill set that we've got from food over there as well.
Sarah, on the topic of the metrics, another question's come in on that. What's one workforce metric leaders should be paying more attention to?
I think it's a really tricky question to pick one metric, but I'm going to stay true to who I am and what I stand for and say I think it's actually NPS. So it's what your customer thinks of what you're doing is the most important metric to care about, and it can be the one that can be easy to lose sight of when you're making workforce change. You can be very focused on, have I hit the cost saving I was driving, or have I hit a productivity number? But actually the one to be really super mindful of, because sometimes you make a change and it has an unintended consequence, good or bad, is what is your customer feeling about that change? So I think customer satisfaction is probably the one I watch most closely.
I think there's probably a chain, isn't there? So there's sort of almost I think you're right. My answer was going to be staff turnover, because that's the event that you want to avoid. And actually before that, you want to make sure, like, employee NPS, you're keeping an eye on that, because that's a leading indicator of staff churn. And then customer NPS is a marker of whether your employees are happy, because there's a great association between great customer service and happy and satisfied employees. And we know from Rotageek, when we optimize staff schedules, actually what we do is we minimize staff churn because staff are happier, and we increase your customer NPS. And so actually, I think you're right, that's the ultimate leading indicator, your customer NPS, before you get down to staff churn, which is the point at which it's all gone wrong.
Yeah, and to that point, it's interesting. I was at a conference earlier this week, and Rami, the CEO at Morrison's, was discussing just that, the NPS, not just the customer NPS, but the employee NPS. And it felt as if he was almost putting more emphasis, in a sense, on the employee. And I guess it goes back to, Richard Branson, I think it was, who probably was one of the first to discuss looking after your employees first and foremost, because then you'll look after your customers. as a direct result of that. We've got just under 2 minutes, so let's squeeze in one last question. So it's going to be a quick fire. You've got about 20 seconds for the answer. What's the earliest signal a board would expect you to see? That's an interesting one. Who wants to take that? What's the earliest signal that you might be expected to see?
Gosh, it's kind of hard because it's sort of out of it depends on the context, I guess. I think probably I've got a different perception of, I guess, boards within Rotageek, but I think almost the board perception of risk and speed is kind of somewhat distracted from the operations on the ground. We can react much faster, and I think we get access to sort of insights much earlier, and they would expect us to see that, but not necessarily surface that to board level, because again, it's that level of noise. Our job operationally is to operate the business, and the board is to provide that level of governance, I suppose. So there's probably a filter that I wouldn't share all of the operational sort of changes up to the board, and likewise. Anyway, I'm not sure that answers the question.
Okay, well, we said that this is going to run for 60 minutes, and we are almost on 60 minutes. So all that leaves me to do is to, first of all, thank everyone for tuning in to this. Thank you so much for listening. But in particular to our fantastic panel, Chris, Sarah, Heather, thank you so much for your insights. It's been amazing. I've certainly learned a lot. I do hope that the audience, you have too, and that you've had some really measurable takeaways to take back to your business and hopefully put into practice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.